I'm going to be honest with you guys, week 11 kind of stinks on DraftKings. However, when weeks stink, that means fewer people are playing, which makes, the same prizes, fewer people competing, more money for us. And like I mentioned at the top, this slate is kind of gross. There are a ton of games that I don't really want to play, and one of the best games on paper, Browns-Bills, potentially has a blizzard coming to Buffalo, so that game might be one we avoid, but there are some games that we can actually play. Eagles-Colts looks to be pretty decent. Eagles in a revenge spot. I anticipate them putting the throttle on against the Jeff Saturday-led Colts. Lions-Giants in a game of just historically bad teams, but very fantasy-friendly teams. 46.5 is that over-under, so we like that matchup. Lamar should go off against the Panthers, so that's viable. Bears-Falcons is a very interesting game between two very bad teams. Very similar to Lions-Giants, but that total is 50. So we want to be careful there. And then the other game to focus on this slate, the only one in the late window that really has the potential to really shoot out, is Cowboys-Vikings, 47.5 over-under. Of the games, the 3 games in the 4 o'clock window, that's the one we definitely want to target. Let's go take a look at the DFS prices, tournaments, cash, all that stuff right now. All right, so let's take a look at the viable quarterbacks in DFS this week. Let's start off with Lamar Jackson because Josh Allen is injured, potential snow game. I don't think he gets a lot of ownership. Ever since his 2 breakout games of 48 and 43 in week 2 and week 3, he hasn't done all that much from a DFS perspective. They don't have the weapons. They don't have the offensive production to, get him to his ceiling. Against Carolina, he is getting Mark Andrews back, so he should be very stackable. I'm not sure I would play him in cash just because of the potential low floor. That's really hard to say about Lamar Jackson, but definitely viable for tournaments. Jalen Hurts is the next guy, and he's kind of just been pedestrian these last 2 weeks, putting up 21 and 22 points in games where he really should have dominated from a fantasy perspective. Goes up against the Jeff Saturday Colts, so maybe it's a get-right game for him after their first loss of the year. So Jalen Hurts, you could definitely play. Probably not for cash yet. The guy I'm thinking about for cash has been Fantasy's quarterback 1 over the past 5 weeks, I believe. That's Justin Fields. 2 straight weeks over 40, 4 straight weeks over 20. 7,600 is a pretty significant price increase for him. However, he is still paying that price off pretty handsomely. We're going to start building our cash lineup by putting Justin Fields in. And then the other 2 guys I want to talk about in a really high scoring game environment are Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins. If you want to play either of them, I think that's fine. Kirk Cousins isn't playing at 1, so he might stink. But if you wanted to do either one in that game, I'd be for it. Running back, we have our usual assortment of top-end guys, starting off with Saquon Barkley against the Detroit Lions. Another really great game environment. Got 35 carries against Houston in the most obvious pay-up and smash spot ever. He was the number 2 running back on the week at 26 points. So if we want to play him, we're going to do it. We have the money to do it right now, so why not? And then you can also play kind of any of these guys in this range from Nick Chubb to Joe Mixon. They're all, they're separated by 800 in price. So if you wanted to get to any of them, I think they all have their merits and they all have some flags in these games. So we want to be careful about all of them, but they're all playable in tournaments. Not going to do them for cash. One guy you can think about for cash is Tony Pollard if Ezekiel Elliott sits. The Cowboys are finally getting him the ball. 22 carries last game, 6 targets, was a clear workhorse and paid it off with 24 points at his 6.5K salary. He stays stagnant despite the price increase. I think DraftKings is expecting Zeke back. So if Zeke is back, don't play him. If Zeke is not back, play him. The next guy we need to talk about is David Montgomery. Now at 6,100, putting up like literally sub 10 points a game since, oh my God. He's only put up above 10 points 3 times this year. But he has been splitting touches with Khalil Herbert, who just went on IR. So we can reasonably expect him to get 20 plus touches through the air and on the ground. So it's kind of weird to talk about him in the same lineup as Justin Fields, who's his quarterback, but he just seems to be too cheap for what his role is going to be. They are underdogs on the road in Atlanta, but David Montgomery for his price, I don't think there's another guy in that price range that projects for his same volume, same game environment, and same opportunity in the offense. And this is kind of a vomit selection, but we pick on the Houston Texans on this channel, especially when it comes to running backs. And Brian Robinson seems to have taken over a lot of the work on the ground for this Commanders offense. Antonio Gibson's still lurking in the shadows and did have like an ankle tweak, which might have inflated this 26 number. But Brian Robinson is super involved and like has sometimes gotten the ball in the air. But he's going against the Houston Texans, and he showed to be a really good running back. 26 carries, 86 yards, and that really nice strongman touchdown. In cash, it seems hard to just avoid the Houston Texans because of the matchup. They'll be favored in this game. I believe they already are. Oh, they're underdogs. Oh, no, sorry, the Commanders, not the Texans. They're favored by 3.5 points, so I believe they'll be up and running the ball. Protecting Taylor Heineke as well, even though he seems to be the GOAT now, drinking Busch Light on the plane. But Brian Robinson, cash play for now. If there seems to be better value opening up, we can get off of him. But right now, we're playing a running back against the Texans who's too cheap for his role in the offense in a game where they're favored and should be running the ball a lot. We're going to quickly lock in our defense and tight end because they are pretty straightforward this week. At defense, we're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who got TJ Watt back and looked a lot better than they had recently against the New Orleans Saints and Andy Dalton. They take Joe Burrow this week, whose offensive line can't stop anybody. And this is the game that TJ Watt got hurt in earlier in the year. So we're going to play him and hope that he just kind of goes off. And then at tight end, with the injury to Dallas Goedert, Jack Stoll is sitting here at min price. Only got, one target last game, but is going to project as the number one tight end in Philadelphia and is just too cheap for being involved in that offense. So we're going to play Jack Stoll at tight end, set it and forget it. Cooper Kupp's ankle injury creates massive unknowns and massive values for wide receiver this week. If we take a look at Cooper Kupp himself, he has 98 targets on the season, which I believe the next highest at wide receiver is Allen Robinson, who has 47. So over double what he's doing on the season, Cooper Kupp has done. So that opens up so many looks for Matt Stafford in this offense, assuming Matt Stafford is healthy this week. And every single one of these receivers projects as a value. So Allen Robinson, 6 targets in Coop's absence, did all right. Van Jefferson is back from an injury, had 3 targets. He's been getting worked in, did have a touchdown last week, so that might steam him up. The guy I'm most interested in, though, is Ben Skoranek, who had 7 targets and is the cheapest one of the group. He has been proven to be part of this offense in the past and, had 8 targets in a game. And through Cooper Kupp, actually being his dominant self, Skoranek kind of profiled as the wide receiver too, especially because Allen Robinson struggled so much earlier in the year. So I'm going to play Ben Skoranek, assuming that he's going to be on the field against New Orleans in a game where they're going to have to pass a little bit, given their struggles at running back and New Orleans' defensive line. He seems like a great play. And then the next guy I just think is too cheap for what he's been doing recently is a first-round pick, Garrett Wilson for the Jets. Going up against New England, it's a tough matchup, but they did play a couple weeks ago where Garrett Wilson had 7 targets for 115 yards, 20 fantasy points. His second best game on the year. He is involved, coming off a bye, is the number 1 wide receiver, and is too cheap for what he's doing right now. So we're going to plug in Garrett Wilson against New England and hope that either New England blows them out and they're passing a lot, or it's a competitive game and the Jets are passing a lot. Now we have 8,500 to play with, so we can get any of these really top-end options outside of Adams and Jefferson this week. Stephon Diggs is probably the guy we're going to plug in. I know the game environment is not great, the weather, Josh Allen's elbow, but even with the elbow, he got 16 targets against Minnesota, went for 126 yards on 12 catches, 27 points. I believe that was his 4th best game on the year. Diggs seems like a great play. You could also go to CeeDee Lamb, who got 15 targets last week. It's clearly Dak's favorite guy, especially as Michael Gallup has struggled. Amon-Ra St. Brown, T. Higgins, if Jamar Chase is out again. All those guys are definitely in play, and then you can kind of mess around with the value on the board. If you see, Brian Robinson, you don't really want to play him, go up from there, go down from Diggs or something else. That's going to be our cash game lineup for this week. Let's take a look at some tournaments. Tournament lineups are primarily based around stacks, quarterbacks with 2 pass catchers, and then a bring back player in the same game. The weird thing about this slate is that there are only 7 truly viable, good, and popular stacks that people are going to go after, meaning you either one, have to get different somewhere else in your lineup if you're playing those stacks, or two, you need to find a stack that no one else is going to be on. Here are my top 7 stacks for the week and how to actually attack tournaments with those stacks. One of my favorite stacks on the week is obviously Chicago. Justin Fields has been fantasy's quarterback 1 over the past 5 weeks, and we want to play him everywhere. And stacking Justin Fields is very easy. You just take Darnell Mooney, who's his wide receiver 1, and Cole Kmet, who's right now his wide receiver 2, 5 touchdowns in the past 3 weeks, and you play them 3 as your stack. There's 2 interesting things about this stack that make it interesting. Number 1 is that David Montgomery projects to be one of the higher owned running backs on this slate, so you get different by not playing David Montgomery and double stacking Justin Fields, who's going to be another popular cash option at quarterback. However, you just differentiate yourself by doing a double stack, where some people might single stack because he runs, or run him naked because he runs. The other interesting part about this lineup is that we typically bring a player back who opposes our stack, assuming that the game environment's great. Atlanta doesn't have a lot of great bring back options, so I may choose to go with no bring back here. Cordero Patterson is someone we love, but his usage just isn't really there as they're going to a 3-headed committee at running back. So it could be a good matchup for him, but it's risky to play him. Drake London seems to be the obvious guy with 5, 6, 7 targets the past couple weeks. Hasn't really repeated his earlier success, but seems to be emerging as the number 1 wide receiver option, so you could go there. And then Kyle Pitts is obviously their best weapon on offense, but we already have a tight end, so it makes it really tough to play him. So Justin Fields stacks get different by playing him as a double versus naked, or just playing David Montgomery in Chicago, and then choose whether you want an Atlanta bring back or not. The next stack I really like is Baltimore, and this is a pretty easy one as well. Lamar Jackson is one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy despite a recent slump, and he is an easy stack as well. Devin Duvernay is the wide receiver 1, despite only having 1 catch last week. Seems to be just the guy who's out there the most. You could talk about D-Rob, Prochet, some of those guys, but they just don't really play as much. And then you can obviously go to Lamar Jackson's number 1 option in Mark Andrews, assuming he is healthy. He has come down in price since his injury. You can easily get him in there. And then you can also go with Isaiah Likely if Mark Andrews is out, but I don't think that that's going to happen. This is a relatively cheap stack for what we typically see from the Ravens, so they're super viable in that sense. And then bringing it back on the Carolina side, I would do any number of guys. Dante Foreman has clearly taken over this backfield, 31 carries on Thursday Night Football against Atlanta, including that touchdown, 22 points. You could also go to DJ Moore, who is a target hog. 6 is his absolute minimum at 5.7. Terrace Marshall has become a guy, not as many targets last week, but is super involved in the offense. And then Laviska Shenault scored a really long rushing touchdown. Was a good play for Showdown, 14.9 points. If you wanted to come back with any one of those guys, I think that's totally fine. I expect Lamar to run away with this game, so you probably want to go to a passing option versus Dante Foreman, but he's getting the usage to justify playing him, so do what you want. It's weird to say I'm not confident in Josh Allen this week, but I'm not all that confident in Josh Allen this week. However, given the way the slate's playing out, you kind of have to consider him with his injury. He did throw it 43 times despite 2 picks, was a fine quarterback option, putting up 25 points last week. He is very stackable with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. You could also go to McKenzie if you wanted to. And then, of course, Dawson Knox is the only tight end playing at the moment. So if you're doing a Josh Allen double, just do any 2 of these guys. I'd probably include Diggs in all of them just because he has 99 targets, which is 1 more than the current leader in fantasy points, Cooper Kupp. So play Diggs and then one of the other guys on this stack, and then bring it back in Cleveland. Couple options. You could obviously go to Nick Chubb, most involved running back. Just kind of has a really, really safe floor and is a good play at all times. Amari Cooper isn't playing at home, but has developed a lot of rapport with Jacoby Brissett, who will be playing for his job in the last week before Deshaun Watson comes back. Donovan Peoples-Jones has become a very popular target, and he was a cash play last week, put up 14 points on 4.3 Sal. And then you could also talk about David Njoku, who's coming back this week. Got 7 targets the last time he was healthy in week 7 and should be back against Buffalo in this game where they should be passing a lot despite the snow. Next up is Philly. This is another very easy stack to make despite how expensive it is. Jalen Hurts is a clear fantasy QB1, and then you stack him with any of his 2 primary wide receivers. Quez Watkins was a little bit more involved than he typically is last week. 4 targets, 80 yards, but that was due to A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, both missing time with injuries, but they're both fine there. So you play either one of them. Dallas Goedert, doubtful, probably out for this game. So Jack Stoll is a cash game tight end. If you wanted to go to him in a Kurt stack to give yourself a little correlation while limiting risk of a 0, that seems good as well. Starting with the 1-point favorites, you can obviously do a Dak Prescott stack this week. CeeDee Lamb is the cleared wide receiver 1 with Gallup still struggling to come back, but he could break out at any time, so we want to include Michael Gallup. Noah Brown, if you want, you can put him in. I probably won't. And then Dalton Schultz is the tight end 1 for the Dallas Cowboys. He's back. He's healthy. Scored a touchdown. Involved in the red zone. He's a great play at 4,300. And quickly talking about the running backs, Pollard and Zeke. If Zeke is back, you don't play Pollard as much. But if Pollard is back, you could stack him with Dak or use him in a bring back with a Kirk Cousins stack, which is actually how I want to use him right now. Kirk Cousins playing at 425, so it's not a 1 o'clock Kirk game, so he might be a little bit riskier just based on the time it starts. But Justin Jefferson is his obvious target 1. Adam Thielen is kind of like the 3rd option at this point, behind another guy we're going to talk about, but just consistently sees 7 targets. So if he just wanders into the end zone, he should be a fine play. And then TJ Hawkinson, who is operating as the team's wide receiver 2, 10 targets last week, is just continuing to do really, really well. He should have a revenge game coming up against Detroit soon. So that should be a fun time to play him, but we'll do him now at any time. And then, of course, you could play Dalvin Cook as a bring back for the Dak stack. He's involved enough. It just continues to do well. And the last stack we care about for this week is Joe Burrow. He's clearly a quarterback 1, despite having 2 down weeks. Has the potential to break any slate, as we've seen many times this year. Probably playing without Jamar Chase, but there is a chance he could come back. And, as we know, Jamar Chase can be fantasy's wide receiver 1. In the game he got hurt, he put up 36 points. So if you wanted to play Jamar Chase, go for it, assuming he's healthy. And then T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd are the clear wide receiver 1 and 2. Hayden Hurst is definitely viable. And then Joe Mixon, if you want to play him in this stack, he is getting the receiving usage to be part of whatever Joe Burrow's doing. So he is stackable. And as he put up 58.1 points last time out, I expect him to come in pretty highly owned against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Speaking of the Steelers, if we wanted to do bringbacks in this game, I would avoid both of these running backs as they're just not involved enough in the passing game, and they're kind of splitting time. So unless Najee Harris is declared out, he's just discomfort, not an actual injury. I wouldn't play Jalen Warren, but you could go to either one of these wide receiver options in Deontay Johnson, whose targets have steadily declined as we've gone from Mitch Trubisky to Kenny Pickett, and as the offense has just kind of stagnated. But he is always a target machine. So hopefully in a pace-up game where they have to throw the ball a lot, he should be more involved. And then George Pickens, who they love and want to get more involved. You see him getting some rushing upside. He had that sweet rushing touchdown. Only 4 targets last week, but at 5,200 with the rushing upside, he might be a decent play. And then, of course, you can go to the Muth, who is their tight end 1 and their second leader in targets on the season. So all 3 of those guys viable for bringbacks. I hope you guys liked the video. Let me know down below if I missed a stack that you want to play this week, or if you like one of the stacks and you're definitely going to run it this week. Hope you guys have a wonderful week 11, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's go.